Order and find our first part of the business here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everyone coming here today. Just want to make sure that we have everything on as far as the live streaming. And as a reminder, we are live streaming again today, so when speaking, please remember to speak into the microphone, which will be helpful. And also, be mindful that the microphones are sensitive as far as going into the recording system and to the video, as far as offline conversations and breaks and so forth. So please keep that in mind. Just for your awareness, the camera is over there on that side of the room, and it's just showing a kind of broad angle from the presenter's table back to the board. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. The first item is the administrative budget request, which is found behind tab D. In many ways, this is somewhat of a formality. This is no different than what the board has approved in the last meeting from a budget request standpoint, just due to the timing of when it was submitted to Elbow. And with that, given it's the same in that regard, I would ask for your final approval.
Are there any questions? Do we have a motion for approval?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Next item is behind tab E, and this is the information in your notebook behind tab E pertaining to the state employee representative election, board election for the unexpired term of previous board member Chris Howard, who just recently retired. And this has been provided for your review, and no single candidate received more than 50%. And so you can see there the information shows, and then our recommendation would be for a runoff between Terrence D. Yarborough and Alan D. Cooper. And you see the proposed ballot and information there in your notebook. We'd like to ask for the board's approval of that runoff ballot.
Any questions there? Do we have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Now, the next tab, tab F, is information pertaining to the other state employee representative on the board election. This is for the full term that is currently occupied by Mr. Breland. In this case, we only received one candidate, which is Mr. Breland. And of course, he currently serves on the board, and his information's been verified. So in accordance with past practice and the board procedures, we would ask that the board approve him as duly elected for the new term. And assuming the board agrees, I would certainly thank him for his past support and congratulate him on a new term.
By far the best way to run.
So moved.
Have a motion, have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And the next one and the last item is Regulation 34. This is something that the board has already approved in the last meeting, and it was Regulation 34 dealing with reemployment after retirement. And the changes were made to reflect legal changes this past session associated with teacher return to work and the critical shortage areas. This regulation is essentially already in effect. The board has already approved it. And it was in accordance with the changes in the law that went into effect July 1st, but we were advised by the Secretary of State's office that it would be best to go ahead and continue on with our standard and the normal process, which would require the final adoption. So with that, we'd like to ask for your approval, and there's no changes since the last time.
Any questions? Do we have a motion for final approval?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor, by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Anything else under the other?
No, sir.
With that, the administrative committee will stand adjourned.
All right, thank you. I think next would be the legislative committee. Mr. Chairman, would it be all right if I go ahead and begin?
Yes.
So thank you for that. So the purpose today is really just to have a discussion of the upcoming legislative session. And I know that there may be some questions and follow-up, but I thought it would be good to provide a little bit of an update and some insight into my thoughts on that, and mainly to receive also some feedback from the board, feedback, guidance, direction, and answering the questions. My thought is to start with, I think the main focus for next session, or this upcoming session, will be funding. I think that is probably the most important issue to fund PERS. I think if someone were to ask me, well, what should I do? Or if an organization or a member or a stakeholder or someone said, well, what should I do? Or, excuse me, or what should I say? Or what should I ask my legislator or local official or whatnot? My answer would be to discussion and agreement.
Pardon me?
Sorry. I would say to fund PERS, support the board, and work together. And that's what it would read like if you put it on a T-shirt. If you put it on a bumper sticker, it would just be fund PERS. And I just think that the events and the studies and the information over the last few years and especially last year has provided a little bit of a clarity in that message and maybe the streamlining of that message on the requirement of the funding. I also would say the funding from last session, small step, we appreciate that, and it's a small step in the right direction. But I think it's also more of a short-term stopgap measure. I think longer term, we're going to need funding more in line with the actuarial recommendations. I know PERS is certainly stable. We have over $34 billion in assets to pay benefits, so it's more of a long-term conversation. But we do need to focus on that. So I would say funding being the key issue. And on that, we, of course, have Ed Coble with CAVMAC, our consulting actuary, doing their normal work throughout the year. We also, to give an update on the additional actuarial work that is underway as well with Chiron and GRS, and we should have that completed into the board prior to the end of October. And so we will have 3 reports from top-tier public pension consulting firms on the required funding associated with PERS. And I would say, to do a little bit of foreshadowing, I could see where I may recommend that we go with the actuarial determined contribution. Just to remind you, more of an ADEC approach, or the ADEC funding policy, if you will. And just to remind you, ADEC is the actuarial determined contribution. We have a metric in our funding policy for that now, but we're about to have 3 reports that will be providing that actuarial determined contribution from the actuaries. And given that, given the studies and the events of the last few years and with the various changes, one being that at this point, we're the fiduciaries, of course, for the trust to make recommendations to the legislature, but the legislature has the authority to implement that. So I could see where we would recommend, as opposed to the phase-in or some of the things we've considered before, what that actuarial determined contribution is. Just keep that in mind. The next thing is a Tier 5. I have stated repeatedly, I think that we need a Tier 5, an appropriate Tier 5, keyword there, appropriate. I've mentioned that for years. I've stated that I think that we may be in a stronger position had that happened earlier. More importantly, the board has approved and recommended a board-approved Tier 5 last session, and of course, the legislature has also acknowledged in a bill their intent to develop one. So I think those are the priorities of funding being number one, fund PERS, and then the concept of a new tier for future employees being next. The other legislative items, I think, need to, in my opinion, would be the second level priority compared to the funding or the new tier, with funding being the number one. We certainly could do more than one thing at a time, but I would just mention, to me, they would be that second level of priority. As I begin to close out, just to recap the legislative package from last year, we had 5 legislative bills, one being the board proposed Tier 5, which was not introduced. Another one being the change in the default option for the COLA to monthly, which was not introduced. The other 3 were one dealing with the ORP program and contributions, the other one with MDC that Empower mentioned yesterday, and then the one about paying off the unfunded liability should an employer, for whatever reason, leave PERS. Those 3 were introduced and passed the Senate. They did not pass the House, and I definitely don't want to speak for the House, but I don't know that that they stalled or failed necessarily due to the content or the merits of the bill. I think it was just the throes of session and all the other focus on other aspects of PERS. So with that said, we certainly could reintroduce those, but just in my mind, behind the priority of funding. With that, I'll have more to say, I'm sure, and more to say later, but I want to pause for questions.
All right, well, Dr. McCoy and I represent the retirees, and as you remember, in the last legislative session, probably our relationship with the legislature got somewhat off track. And I think most of our folks that we represent have telephones. And I think they used them sometime 2 and 3 times, and I would hope that we don't get to that point in this session. So Dr. McCoy is going to address possibly some of our thoughts as to where we go and with what enthusiasm legislatively. Are you prepared to mention that now?
I am.
Well, go right ahead.
The thing that I believe that this board needs to consider and needs to do is to develop a plan, even if it's just a consensus plan. And we probably need to have that consensus today, in my opinion, before we leave. We've had 5 items that we introduced to the legislature that we wish that we would be passed. Now, our director has put those in different levels. I don't know if they need to be in different levels, but all of them need to be worked on quickly. Now, I don't mean in a hasty manner, but in a quick, thorough manner. For instance, I think that the proposal requiring the payment of the unfunded actuarial liabilities, you know, if a entity decides to go, if that's what we still believe, then we need to go ahead and vote on it and do that. The same thing about the changes to the Mississippi Deferred Comp Program to get in the Roth program, I believe is what it is. If we still believe that, we just need to go ahead and vote that and say to the legislature, here it comes. Because we think that this is important. Federal law allows us to do it. It's good for our membership. Please enact on this.
To interrupt you right there,
Yes.
just right quick, is that the only thing left for Secure 2.0 that we need to do?
I don't, let me ask the better.
Yeah, that's like one of the major, that's the thing we need.
I know that's the major thing, that's the major thing, but if we do that, we're fairly compliant with 2.0 then.
And I don't completely understand that. What are you talking about?
Yes, you are.
He's talking about the federal law that prompted the change in MDC that we were proposing last year.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
The other thing is the COLA default to monthly for new employees, new retirees. If that's beneficial to the system, we just need to go ahead and say that. The changes to the optional retirement plan. And that would, you know, what all we discussed. The question for the board is in, well, let me go ahead and mention the other, the tier 5. If we need to discuss or have any other input from our actuary or from our director, he needs to, you all need to get that and get that done for us by the next meeting. So we can go ahead and just clear the board on that and get that out of the way. That's my opinion. Now, my opinion again is the first 4 that I mentioned, I don't know that there's much changing that any of the numbers that we had occur last year at the end of the fiscal year are going to have an impact on that. Ed, are any of those going to have any significant impact on the numbers that we had on those other 4 proposals? Maybe the director, maybe that you need to answer that.
I would say no. I think you're on the right track, and to what you're saying, that this is exactly what this meeting's for today, to get feedback, guidance, or direction from the board, and to just comment briefly on what you said. We certainly can do that, and on all those bills that you're asking about, with the exception of tier 5, the other ones you talked about, with all of them really, but especially those, we're ready now if the board wants to do that today and just kind of confirm from last year. We already have drafts ready. We know the concepts, so we're ready and could be ready today. The only thing I would say, and we certainly could look at tier 5. I would say we're probably even ready for tier 5, and I know that we'll discuss that more, but that'd be the only one where we may want to update some numbers or double check. But we can do that. We can be ready, and we're ready today. While I'm talking, I will say, the only change in my recommendation from last year is I wouldn't recommend moving forward with the, this time, with the changing of the default to monthly. We certainly could, and I defer to the board or the committee's wishes, but I wouldn't recommend it at this time, because if it's just changing the default option, it seems to be too much of a distraction and gets misunderstood, and I think with the other bills and other priorities, I wouldn't recommend that one, but the other three, including the tier 5, million 4, I guess, I'd recommend those.
A comment about that is we've been distracted with that about 4 or 5 times now. If we don't keep putting it in front of the membership, I don't know that they'll ever fully understand what we're asking. And I think we need to continue to, if that's what we believe, that it's of a benefit to the system, and especially our employees here and what we have to do, especially the drawdown in cash that we have to do at the end of the year every year to pay the COLA for those that have selected the single check method. I think it would smooth that out now. I don't think we need to change anybody, that the way they have it on done right now, but the default ought to be, it just goes just like your Social Security. You get it every month. You don't get a choice there, but that's my opinion. And of course, the board needs to discuss this. Now, I would agree with you that the tier 5 is going to need some more conversation. Of course, I think everybody knows my opinion, that I think there needs to be a built-in COLA there. I would like to see those numbers again. And why did we choose a tier 5 with a defined benefit? Look at the reasons why we chose not to go with any sort of defined contribution, to see if those are still valid in our minds. And the cost is primary thing that I recall on that. But I would like to see a refresher, and if any numbers have changed from our fiscal year ending June 30th, that we would need to know that. And primarily, the reason I think that the COLA needs to be guaranteed is because the inflation rate has been such. Over the last 60 years, inflation is over 3%. Now, if we choose not to stay with the 3% or go with the 2% or whatever, I still think that that's a valid thing for a retirement system to do. Yes, we've had a negative outflow of money in years past. However, we have had a good asset allocation, and we've had good returns over the years, and we've been able to maintain a balance of over $33 billion right now and still pay that. So, anyway, I think that the tier 5 needs to be discussed again with the numbers, and certainly board members can say, let's just vote. I'll make a motion to do it just like we did it. Board can vote and the board can speak. So these are just Randy McCoy's opinion of what we need to do here on these 5 items that we have already voted on one time and adopted for our legislative program. So I'm going to stop there before I go to my next topic.
Okay,
Commissioner.
are any comments thus far from anyone before Randy goes to this next topic? All right, we'll continue.
I have a question on the deferred comp. This was mentioned yesterday about a funding mechanism on the Roth piece. Can you elaborate on what funding you need as it relates to Roth? There was a comment made about 30 minutes in yesterday that it.
Let me ask Ms. Lee to come up, or maybe go to the microphone there in case you need to speak, but I'm not really familiar with that. I'd have to, I know what the legislation was, to comply with the recent changes in federal law to provide for the Roth option for catch-up contributions, particularly around high wage earners. And then while we were in there, we were gonna provide for, quadros, qualified domestic relation orders, even though that didn't come up much yesterday. But I'm not, are you familiar with what he's talking about with the comment yesterday?
So what the request is because of Secure 2.0, it's required now that if you're going to have age 50 plus catch-up contributions in your 457, not just 457s, it's 403Bs, 401Ks, not just us, but we have the 457. So that's why we're concerned about that. You have to allow Roth contributions, which is an after-tax method of paying into deferred comp. All deferred comp currently is pre-taxed. So it's pre-tax money. You've not paid taxes on that money when you deposit it into your deferred comp. A Roth means they've taken out the taxes, then they put the money in deferred comp. And
Right.
so this is,
I understand that. There's $1,000 buyback, I think, if you're over 50 to pay a catch-up provision. $7,500, I think, is the max now. But my comment was yesterday, at about 32 minutes in, I got to listen to the live stream, by the way. That's lovely. Great job, guys.
Thank you.
There was a comment from a presenter that was talking about the legislature and a funding mechanism as related to Roth. I didn't understand that.
so what he
That's my
meant,
question.
yeah, you're
Probably
absolutely right.
terminology, maybe that,
We just need authority. Right now, the law says it's pre-tax.
yeah. authority.
And so we can't implement a Roth without some changes in the law. And Senator Blunt actually sponsored that for us last year. Thank you, sir. And that's, we're just asking that be put in state law so that we can become compliant with federal law.
You just need authority. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, not funded, yeah, sorry.
And the other advantage to that, in my opinion, is for a lot of our folks on the county level that are not at the high level, they may be better off putting in a Roth on the front side versus a non-taxed on the back side. They could easily come out.
Yeah, some of your
At an
younger
income level.
participants in the earlier tax brackets of their life, it may be in their best interest to go ahead and pay that tax while they're starting out and pay into a Roth, which is something this board actually presented several years ago for that reason, prior to Secure 2.0. But now it's because we'll have to cancel all age 50 plus catch-up contributions if we don't have Roth. And so that was the request yesterday.
Whether the Roth is required for them or not.
That's correct.
There wouldn't be
It's
any
all or
catch-up.
none.
Thank you.
And I'm the one who brought up quadros. And because you and Senator Blunt may be involved with that, just because we have cases periodically where that's the only asset. And we can't divide it. But that's not a huge deal out of the package. I was the one who pushed the quadros at the time.
And in my mind, I did not hear anything that said that required funding from the state. It's just in the change of the terminology.
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's okay.
Are there other comments on Dr. McCullough's, before he goes to the next item? Continue, Dr. McCullough.
If I could, I would like to comment on, Tier 5 on that briefly, but.
Well, let's come back to that, but go with your other one, and then we'll come back and go over all of them if you would like.
That'd be fine, sure.
Okay. The next part is the funding that we received from the legislature. And I must say, I appreciate the funding, the cash infusion, and the tax over the next 5 years. What the legislature tried to do is, in my mind, what this board has always tried to do is have a multi-year plan so that when we ask for an increase in the contribution rate, in our minds, it would cover and it would allow people to plan at the local levels, all of the taxing entities, so that it would cover a number of years. With the law as has been passed now, I feel as if I know by the amount of cash infusion, the amount of tax increase contribution rate every year, we now have what I'm going to call a fairly significant change in our request from the board as to what we're going to need, because our plan was such that over 30 years, we would be up to about 80% funded. It's what it would be. Well, with what occurred, I think the numbers are going to tell us that it's going to be significant change or a fairly significant change. I don't know precisely what that's gonna be. So my question to Ray and to the actuaries is how soon can we get that number so that we know what we're trying to do for the next 5 years? We just heard yesterday from Callan about the 10-year projection and what our range of returns and our asset allocation, and it looks pretty good, even though the 10-year range is from 4% or 0.4% up to 15%. That range looks good for what we're at, our goal is of 7% return. So my question is then, for us to do that, how soon can we get those numbers? And what do we need to, because I think it's already been demonstrated that we've got other actuaries that are going to be looking at these requests. So my question is, are those additional actuaries going to be looking at precisely the same thing that we're talking about here now? Looking at the change in the funding for us to get to that 80 or 100% level in 30 years. Is that what these other actuaries are going to be looking at?
Yes, sir. And to answer your question, we can certainly do that timely. I would say, at least on a preliminary basis, by the next meeting. CAVMAX work's underway. The other two actuaries' work's underway. We should be finished prior to the end of October. That is going to provide, in my mind, the information that you're talking about, because all of the work and their standard work from CAVMAC will have the actuarial valuation that shows funding ratios and rates and the ADEC and so on and so forth. It'll also have the projection, which projects it out to 2047 or even a little further, 30 years out. So that'll be available. And the other two actuarial firms are doing similar work with their two independent actuarial assessments, which will be similar to, you could call it a concurrent actuarial audit, if you will, as we discussed before. And they'll be replicating liabilities, validating the assumptions, producing the rates, and so on and so forth. All of that, if I'm understanding you right, will show what the recommended or required or actuarial determined funding is. And it will be, I believe, more so, much more than the 17.9% of payroll. And it will be different based on what you described. And then, I don't want to get the cart in front of the horse too much, wait and see it, but I suspect, at least on the projection front, and Ed can certainly comment on this, I think that the numbers, will look different and will be less and look worse, if you will. As far as time on that, we could, I don't know that he's prepared today or has a computer, but the official numbers should be prior to the end of October, as I mentioned. As far as estimates or projections and working things, as we went over in the last meeting, the different scenarios and modeling based on last session. So we can have that estimates at any time, and the official numbers prior to October, I think.
Okay, well now, you mentioned one of the things
End of
that
October.
I have a concern about, and that's the assumptions that are made. This board has always approved the assumptions that we use. Are these two actuaries going to bring their change in assumptions to us for us to approve them? Or are they just going to take the assumptions we've already approved? Or are they going to make assumption changes on their own without this board's input?
No assumptions will be changed. The board would continue to review and adopt that. As far as the actuaries, since it is an independent assessment and they're doing the work, we let them complete their work. But what they'll be doing as a part of that will be reviewing the existing assumptions, reviewing the ones that we have approved for the consulting actuary to work, ensuring the work's being done consistent with actuarial standards of practice and that the assumptions are valid and so on and so forth. So I think they're going to be verifying or validating our assumptions, and should they deem it appropriate, they may suggest or recommend some changes, but they won't be changing them. And I don't necessarily suspect that they will recommend changes, but that's how the process would probably unfold. Similar to an audit. And just to remind you, like the last one just a couple of years ago, that's very similar to what the actuarial audit firm did. And in their case, they were one of the several that recommended that the assumed rate of return be lowered. And so this time when they look at it, if they identify any changes, they could submit that.
Well, now that's another one of the concerns that I have, is if it's gonna be similar to an actuarial audit. The last time we did that, the actuaries came in and said, we would have done it differently than your actuary. And it was not something that we agreed with. And we essentially said to GavMac, we prefer what you did, and we don't think that their assumptions or their changes that were recommended are appropriate. Now, one of the concerns that I do have is we may get these assumption changes, or say we would have modified it and it would have changed the number in this manner. And it goes back to what you say, Commissioner, is that when we get those three things and we provide all three of those to the legislature, we may say, we like this one, and the legislature, with the change of the law, is gonna say, well, we think this other one is better, and we're gonna go with this other one. So I think there could possibly be some unintentional tension that's gonna be, or can possibly be built here. And I just wanna clarify in my mind, how those other actuaries are going to actually do and use the assumptions, because the assumptions have a big impact on the numbers that we look at and the numbers that we approve.
Well, just for confirmation on the last, I don't remember the last actuarial audit, just for confirmation. Could be terminology. I don't remember it
It
that
may have
way.
been 2 times ago,
That-
and you weren't even here.
That's
at
what I was
that
gonna say.
time.
Yes, sir. I think that's the one
The
you
one
were
you're talking about
you're
was
just
pre.
describing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then as to the latter part of the question, as mentioned before, outlined before, presented before, they'll be doing the 2 independent actuarial assessments, which will be essentially a concurrent actuarial audit. And as it relates to assumptions, they'll be looking at the ones that the board has adopted and the ones that we've used, and ensuring that they seem to be reasonable, appropriate, valid, consistent with actuarial standards of practice. And I think I'm using some of the correct terminology,
You are.
Ed. And
You are.
feel free to comment on any of this if you'd like
And
to.
we'll really just have to deal with that when they get here.
Exactly, and I was about to say,
that's-
thank you.
That's gonna be just, when they get here, we'll see what they've got
And that was gonna be my recommendation, let the work unfold and you go from there, but.
Okay, the other question that I have, are all 3 of these actuarial numbers, when they finish their report, do we get all those reports first? Or are they shared with what is the process for us sharing all of that with the legislature?
So to be
Who do
determined.
they work
and-
for?
I'm sorry.
Sir?
Who pays them, who they work for? I think that depends on who gets it first, doesn't it?
That's correct. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Us, yes, it would. As far as that and how it be relayed, however we decide, or to be determined, or how the board prefers, but it would be provided to us. Typically, the way it would be is it would come to staff. We would review it. I would certainly, in this case, get it to the board as soon as possible, and it would be the board, because these 2 actuaries that we're talking about actually work for PERS, so we'll be the first ones and the primary ones, and then we'll present it to the board, and then we'll relay what the board determines to recommend to the actuary. And of course, the reports would all be available and public and things of that nature. You know, similar to, it would basically be just like we do our standard actuary reports. It'll just be 2 additional,
I
essentially.
thought is the legislature is gonna want it just as soon as they can get it, so they can do their work with it. And that's another reason that my thought is that it should be done as quickly as possible, so that there's time for that to be considered or worked into the plan, since the legislature is, in my mind, gonna be very active in the planning and in the looking at the numbers that have historically been housed here, and now it's going to be shared with the legislature. So that's just my thought process. I may be off base, but that's just my thought.
Chairman Breland has a question.
Yeah, well, not really, excuse me, a question, more so, I think to your point, Dr. McCoy, is some of that's informational and will come out and decisions can be made on it. The difficulty in my mind right now is how to stay in our lane when it comes to that. If just theoretically, one of these or both of these auditors come back, these reviewers come back, and they have differences. Legislature has that report. That's the legislature's job to decide whether they want to take that on as development of the plan. Same with Tier 5. Same with a lot of these things. Now, once it's legislated and then the execution of it is, of course, here. And anything that's allowed by the legislature to be here. And that's the difficult part. How do we get that relationship there to have some of this discussed, and have it to where it's not seen as a surprise or anything else, which, I wouldn't say that it should have been before now. I'm not saying it was. But how do you keep that from happening in the relationship and being able to, but also knowing that there are connections this board has for reasons that are inherent. And in that, we're also gonna be there as kind of the front line of some of the folks who say, wait, what's going on with this over here and everything? And so we can't steer clear of some of it either, because we're just gonna get pulled into some of that discussion. And I think we need to know what our positions will be on some of it, but that may come after some discussion with legislators, and that may be in session or maybe before session, but that's the part I don't know how to do. And of course, we've got a great group of legislative liaisons with us, and
And I would say that's
appreciate their
particularly,
feedback.
that's particularly true with Tier 5, I believe.
Right. I mean,
I think that's gonna be particularly true with Tier 5, as to how do they want us involved in.
right. But knowing that
That we're
people are
gonna
gonna
be-
ask us, and they're gonna say, well, aren't y'all the board? I mean, what are y'all gonna do? And we need to be prepared for that, and we need to, and that's where that relationship with the legislature and continuing that is gonna be of ultra importance, especially this coming session, I think. So anyway, that's not solving anything. It's just my biggest concern out of all of those facts and figures and changes is how do we communicate and cooperate and work with the legislature to make sure we're not.
And administer the plan as prescribed.
Right.
Which is what we're required to do.
That's right.
And advise
And advise.
as is tolerable, if you will. So we don't want to not be there, which I think we are, and available, but we also don't want to be in the way other than for the fact that we are going to be in the middle with the members, retirees, all of them, and the legislature. That's just that's what they expect. I don't know that that's what the board expects. I think that's what members and retirees expect, is for us to be in it. And how to coordinate that, navigate it, that seems to be one of the biggest challenges to me.
All right, you want to continue?
Well, my only other, question now is, did I hear you correctly, that the projections that would be coming from CAVMAC, we would have that in a preliminary form for the projections of what it would take to be at the 80 or 100%, or whatever the 30-year projection is at the next meeting.
Yes, that's what we're striving for, and have every reason to expect that, even maybe the final reports from CAVMAC, by the end of October.
So now my question is, how far in advance of the meeting itself will I have that data to look at it so that I can be prepared to discuss it with the board?
All right, Senator Blunt had a comment.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll wait till Dr. McCoy finishes. I didn't have anything on my mind at that moment, I'll just let him
Well, I
finish.
was giving you the
point.
opportunity and you passed. it.
Okay, well,
I hadn't asked to be recognized, but since you've asked for my opinion, I'm a legislator, and I'm always happy to share my opinion. I would say the board, as fiduciaries, needs to tell the legislature what the board believes is in the best interest of the system and the retirees and the members. Regardless of what you think the legislature wants to hear, I think you need to tell them what you think we need to hear. And I talk to any number of groups who want to go to the legislature, and they try to anticipate the reception they may get. They try to anticipate what legislators want to hear or what they think may be possible in the legislative environment or any of that stuff. Don't worry about that. Y'all are the fiduciaries. You know the numbers. You are the experts, and you tell the legislature what you think needs to be done for the best interest of the members and the retirees. And then if the legislature chooses to do something different, then that's on the legislature. But don't be intimidated. Just do your best, and then the legislature will listen to you and everybody and make a decision. But that would be my only advice to you on any of these options that you're considering or bringing forward. So thank you.
Okay. All right. Dr. McCoy, would you have other
Well,
remarks?
I was just gonna say that, a board meeting is really a meeting amongst the board members. That's what it is. We ask staff to provide us with information so that we can make a decision. I believe that the board meeting is where we speak to one another with all of our concerns. Quite honestly, I'm gonna play devil's advocate and ask other questions, and you may not know precisely how I feel until the vote is taken. But then once the vote is taken, then this board has spoken. It doesn't make a bit of difference what Randy McCoy said. As a member of the board, that's what we're gonna do. And when I speak to groups, I speak that the board has voted to do this, and this is why the board voted to do that. So I believe that it is imperative that we all state our opinions and try to convince the other board members, even if it appears, and I use that word really loosely, even if it appears that there is not unity on the board. I know every one of the people on this board, and I know that every one of you have an opinion, but yet when it's voted, I still respect every board member to say, when we leave here, this is what the board voted on. It's best for the group. So what we speak to one another, and even though we face Mr. Higgins and we talk to him, I'm really talking to y'all. That's who I'm really talking to. So I just wanted to make clear of my thoughts about how board acts and how board interacts and what the board meeting actually is. That's the reason we call it a board meeting. It's because of the people that had to make the decision. So I think, Mr. Commissioner, that I have covered. I think that we need to act quickly on all 5 of the things that we proposed last year, because essentially none of them were approved. There was funding. Our funding proposal was not approved. There was a change in that. We're going to get, by the next meeting, I hear, the new funding that the actuary is going to give to us to discuss. But these other things, I think that, and to me, 4 of the 5, the only one that I really want to discuss further and see other numbers and the impact on is the Tier 5. And go back and look at why we chose this particular Tier 5. And then go ahead and prepare that and get that out of the way. So now that's concludes all of my comments.
Okay, thank you for that. My comment, in my visits with some leadership in legislature since last year's debacle. Um, I've been led to believe that PERS right now is not really on the forefront legislative, that there are issues on taxes and tax breaks and a lot of other issues that's probably a little more on the forefront than our issue is. So what I would like us to do is for us to fully understand what we're sending over there. And it may require a little additional discussion, more discussion among us. I know it will to me, to understand a couple of those recommendations, but I would like to see us put that together and get it over to legislative leadership with the understanding this is a recommendation. And that's, we recommend. If they pass all 5 of them, great. If they don't pass 2 of them, fine. We live with whatever is passed, is my understanding. But that we do our job in recommending these 5 things or 4 things or whatever, and they take whatever action they feel like is in the best interest of the people they represent. Mr. Director, do you have other things?
I do, thank you. I would like to comment on a few of the things mentioned. Mr. Coble was wanting to say a few words, if that's okay, though, in case I shift.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind the board of last year's valuation results. The ADEC, the actually determined contribution, was over 25% of payroll. And our recommendation to the board for funding was 27.4% of payroll ongoing for the remaining 30-year period. Those numbers will change with the new valuation. Obviously, we've got a great investment year. There will be demographic experience gains or losses that will occur. But just to give you an idea of where the number is going to be around, that 25% ADEC was anticipated to grow to about 27% over the next few years as we recognize some asset losses. So just a reminder that that's where we were at last year, and we're doing everything we can to get you the valuation results as soon as possible for the October board meeting. So you have plenty of time to vet those results, and we'll have a recommendation again, like we always do, for contributions going forward. So just kind of wanted to remind y'all.
Let me address that. I think that's a point that's well taken. 27% actually showed up in the document that went over, and I believe some legislator said, well, it's going to 27%. Well, no, the board had never voted on that. The board did not take the actuary's numbers. What the board did, now let me speak. What Randy McCoy did was looked at the historical returns and where we had. And it was my feeling that we had no reason to go to the 27 because the 25 would be appropriate with the average of what I thought the return. So as an individual, I was taking that into consideration. And the board has, in years past, multiple times, not taken the full recommendation of an actuary because we took other items that we had in our hands. This was a 30-year projection. We got Callan's 10-year projection. We have 2 different projections, and we have to massage those numbers ourselves and get those together in our minds. So I think that what we tried to do was over a 5-year period, give stability to the funding and what was necessary to take care of 5 years. And quite honestly, I would deal with the other 2% at the end of the 5 years, because if we have 10% for 5 years in a row, all of a sudden, we made a really good decision, you know. I mean, so I just want to say that the board does not always go with the pure recommendation of the actuary.
All right. Thank you, and thank you for that. You covered some of what I was going to say, and just briefly on that, even though we'll wait, and we should wait to the final and the additional reports, are available. I don't think anyone should be surprised that I believe those recommendations, as he's indicated, will be recommending a noticeable and a significant amount more funding compared to the current rate. So as far as getting to the comments about as soon as possible and providing that information and getting it as soon as possible, I think we have every reason to expect that the ADEX from all three actuarial firms will indicate more. As to some of the other discussion, really appreciate the feedback and discussion from the board and listening to you, you all, just to talk about some of that briefly. Yes, definitely. We will try to provide it as soon as possible. Happy to do that. We are expediting it to the extent we can now, moving things along and providing things and doing it faster. Just to remind you, typically these reports are presented in December, as already been mentioned. We're going to be aiming to do that in October, and we'll get them to you as soon as possible. It seems like today that we're possibly talking about legislation, or at least some of them on the board's approved package, and just want to say and agree that be happy to do that. We're ready to do that. We could do that today if the board wants to essentially reaffirm the bills or the package from last year, and so we can continue to move along. Really no changes on the MDC part, ORP, or the unfunded, and on the tier 5, happy to provide information, happy to do that. But I think conceptually or big picture wise, we could even do that today if you prefer to just resubmit or reaffirm, whatever you prefer on that. On the bill for the default to the monthly COLA, certainly don't have any strong feelings. Happy to do as the board prefers. The reason I didn't recommend that, and to circle back to some of what you said earlier, the way, I don't know, and I'm not necessarily convinced that the way the final version was proposed with just changing the default, I don't know that that's going to have a significant impact. Now, as I mentioned before in previous meetings, moving to the monthly COLA as opposed to the lump sum, that could be helpful. On a larger scale, that could be helpful if we did that going forward, but the way it's currently designed, I don't know that that's going to have a significant impact, but I'd be happy to do as y'all prefer. Lastly, on the tier 5, since we're talking about that some in the concept, in the context of development of the board package, I'm going to approach that briefly, I guess, broadly, and then more narrowly as it relates to the board. And some of this, I think, touches on the comments of Mr. Breland and Mr. Benson as well, at least indirectly. Broadly speaking, I think we also have to remember that it's ultimately the state's role as the sponsor to design the plan, to design the benefit structure. We as fiduciaries, as we always say, just simply administer the benefits as they are designed in law. So broadly speaking, that's something for the board just to be contemplating as we move forward. And like they said or implied, regardless of anyone's preferences, I think the practical reality, one, we need to be available as a resource, and we know the plan, we know the industry, and I think it would behoove the state to work with us. And as I've said before, I hope we all work together. So we definitely, as I think Senator Blunt said, that are the experts on it. So we definitely need to be prepared for that. But regardless of preferences of the board's involvement, I think the practical reality is, as you said, there are going to be those who are asking PERS and the board and so on and so forth. But for you to just keep in your mind how you feel and how you begin to develop your positions about what is the role, remembering that it's ultimately the state that designs a plan. Put another way is they make the law and we administer the law. More specifically to PERS and the board, and again, happy to update numbers or do as y'all prefer, but I would mention, if you think about it, we definitely we've studied the various options very extensively the last 2, 3, 5 years, especially the last couple of years leading up to the board approved tier 5 last year. So just for thought's sake in the future, is that something that we want to open up? And would it yield a different result given it's essentially the same board except for one retirement? And then if you do begin to do that, do we open those other ideas up? I'll just pause there. But I don't know that it would necessarily yield a different result, but happy to do that. But just something for y'all to think about.
Any further questions of Mr. Higgins?
Well, let me answer his question.
Okay.
Yes, I think we need to open it back up, because I would like to know what would happen if we guaranteed a 2% COLA. I would like to know how it would impact if we guaranteed a 1% COLA out there. I don't think I can make a legitimate decision about leaving it alone unless I know what those other numbers are and how that would impact the future out there, because those that would be coming on a tier 5, it doesn't take them 30 years to retire at 35. We're gonna have people coming in, if I recall, at average age right now coming into our system is about 35. So we're gonna have people retiring before that. So if the average age is, we're gonna have people coming in at 50 and they're gonna be retiring under tier 5, and that's gonna be a different number. So, I mean, we're gonna have, you see what I'm saying? And that's gonna have an impact, and unless I see those numbers, I won't know. So, yes, personally, I'm gonna vote to look at those things. I would like to know precisely how it's gonna impact what numbers we're gonna be looking at as we make, and it may be that we need to leave it exactly the same, but I'd like to see what.
You're
those
speaking for
numbers are.
tier 5 only.
Sir?
You're speaking for tier 5 only.
Tier 5 only,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
tier 5 only, yes.
Any-
Okay, now I do have one other question about the numbers that we're gonna be receiving in October. We know precisely now what the next 5 years' contribution has been established. Are we going to, in what we see from CAVMAC, are we gonna see a recommendation? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but in my mind, I'm seeing, how much would it be in direct cash infusion from the legislature if they did it all? If the legislature chooses to increase the contribution rate over the next 4 years, a small amount at a time or a large amount at a time, if we don't see those kinds of things in there as well, that's beneficial to the board, and also would be beneficial to the legislature to see those numbers, how that would be. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is I want to see a lot of options.
Yeah, that's,
No, I was just-
Okay.
But it really won't, all you're gonna tell us though is dollars.
well, I can do it, it's part of our risk assessment. And that's part of my job as the actuary, is to present all the stress testing, scenario testing that y'all want to see. So we can certainly stress test the scenario test it through the risk section of the valuation report to say what combination of dollars and percentage of payroll increase will get to the number that we're recommending as the actuary.
Yes.
And if that's, I know we're at $110 million that came in this fiscal year, if that's a good number going forward, what is that in combination with a percentage increase get to the point where I want to get to?
In other words,
Or
what I'm
the
saying is
actuary.
we get $110 million every year, and we've got the current contribution rate. How much more will the current contribution rate have to increase over time to get to the end number that we have? So that's the coordination of numbers that I would want to see.
We certainly can do that and have, as we've done in meetings or work sessions, he can model it and stress test it and things like that. As far as the official reports, I think they're gonna provide the valuation and the projections based on what officially is, meaning what does the law say, or what are the rates, what are the assumptions? So it will reflect the 0.5% for 5 years, right?
That's correct.
All right, anything else, Mr. Higgins?
I don't think so, other than I defer to you and the committee if we want to firm up any direction on those other bills. It looks like we're going to be talking about tier 5 with some updated numbers. You want to wait on the other 3 or 4? Or?
Would we talk about that in legislative committee or administrative committee?
Uh, Whichever you prefer, I guess probably it could be either, but I would,
Before we have those conversations and maybe before CAVMAX numbers are in, could we just get a really quick, maybe 2-minute refresher at that meeting of how the law changed and what it is we're really supposed to do, just so it's real clear what was written in the bill that passed
sure.
last session?
Sure. So that one, it basically, maybe in a different order, but it rescinded the previous board-approved employer rate increase, substituted in its place 0.5% a year for 5 years. It stated the legislature's intent to develop a Tier 5, and it indicated the board should make recommendations on funding but that be accompanied by two independent actuarial assessments. And Ms. Lee, did I forget anything? That's it, isn't it? That's it, yeah, so.
And I didn't make notes. When are the other actuarial reports going to be available,
We are striving to have all that by the end of October,
including the two additional?
including the two additional. And I don't want to commit too firmly for that since they have to complete the work and I can't totally control that, but that's the current plan.
So it seems like it'd be hard to make any recommendations until we've received all of that information and taken it in.
Sure.
Okay.
Is it true that with the recommendation of the 0.2% from the entities and the infusion from the legislature, that pretty well was close to what we had recommended?
Yes, sir, for 1 year. It was off a little bit, but broadly speaking, it was really close to 1 year. But the way the board had recommended it, it would have the recurring amount as a percentage of payroll, whereas the 110 million was just a one-time as of
I
last year.
continue to be amazed in my years of observing the legislature about making sausage. All that grounded up, and usually when it comes out on the other end, it's something we can live with, just like sausage. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think the comment Senator Blunt made earlier is spot on, that this board's, part of its duty is to present its position. But it's not like that's a mystery to the legislature. We sit in a room just like this, and we have competing interests that have diametrically opposed positions that present their case. And sometimes it goes one direction, sometimes it goes the other, sometimes it's a hybrid, or it may be a resolution. But on the legislative package that came over last year, as far as the ORP, I don't think that's I don't think that needs change or has a lot of change around it. I think that comes over. I think that's something, if we understand what that actually means, as the employer rate goes up, that ORP rate does not need to track it. Now, that's a simple definition of that bill, if I'm not mistaken.
I agree.
And so I think that if in a perfect world, the board made a recommendation and sent over model legislation, and it was something the legislature could pass, that would be easy for all beneficiaries and members to get behind. One of the best things you're doing is what we're doing right now, because these discussions and these questions and these concerns that each of you as board members are making on behalf of our members and beneficiaries, as well as a presentation from the investment people, et cetera, shows that transparency. But that ORP, yes, that piece I think is very necessary, speaking for myself. The deferred comp, if all that is authority from the legislature, then that makes sense that you need to be able to do that to be with Secure 2.0, et cetera, with the Roth part. What we want to try to do is not get blended, not get things tied together, as often happens, as Commissioner said, the sausage making, things get blended. But the questions that come often in committee, for instance, I'll address the unfunded liability payoff if somebody departs the system. If that bill came into a committee in finance or wherever, and I'm on that committee, one of my questions would be, but what if that entity lowers their PERS participation to a de minimis amount to keep from having to pay off that liability, but they've technically skirted the law? So just because we don't take a recommendation from the PERS board or anybody else and say we reject that premise, that's not true. But if we have people who have been active PERS participants with large employee counts that don't want to get out of the system because they'd have to come up with a lump sum of money. So they just cut it to the bone. We don't want to legislate their ability to do that. So I assure you, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this board and to try to work with my colleagues in the Senate and the House to try to implement good policy. But that's some of the thinking process for us, is we want to accomplish what's good for the system, but also not set up a circle that someone can jump outside of, if that makes sense. So, I appreciate the ability to be here, but I really do believe the streaming, because even with some of our colleagues, we can say, y'all need to go back and listen to that, because we do that in committee hearings on the Senate side, and it is very easy when a constituent is upset about something for me to say, would you please go watch the debate we had in committee or on the floor, and at least that helps. So I do appreciate that.
Thank you, absolutely.
Thank you, Senator Sparks and Senator Blunt. That's very important, I think, feedback, at least for one board member, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
And speaking to the issue that the senator brought up, one of the issues that PERS is experiencing, and like I say, somebody cutting to the bone to stay in the system but getting out, because one of the issues big issue we have is number of employees paying in versus number of employees taking out. Well, one of your colleagues who has also approached me with this, and I don't know if there are numbers there, but one thing that he approached about looking at was a surcharge on privatization. That if agency, county, city, whomever goes into a privatization contract, have a 5%, I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, surcharge to that contract that goes to PERS for doing that, which might or might not prevent them from doing it, but at least generate some funding. I don't know if there's a repository out there that shows what all of these individual contracts are and what that generates, but it is some number that I would say would be semi-significant over the other that might be worth looking at. Also.
And I agree, and that's the piece that no matter what CAVMAC comes back with or the other two actuaries, ultimately we're trying to spitball, for lack of a better word, to see where revenue potentially is being lost to the system that for statewide efficiency, for the benefit of maybe the services we provide as a state, might be better off that it's not done like it had been done, but yet we're not crippling the system through that. And that's not going to be in the actuarial world, but that's ways that hopefully we can create a stream.
And in Lee County, we privatized garbage, not because of trying to do something different with PERS, but because our board believed that waste management was better at picking up garbage than the county was. But if there was a surcharge, we didn't lose but a couple of employees, but it is a couple of employees. So if there's a surcharge to that $500,000 or whatever amount the contract was per year, at least PERS receives something for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, that all sounds good. One quick thing, all right, so it seems like that for the next meeting, that we'll be coming forward to essentially resubmit or reaffirm the past legislative package, at least several of those bills. So we'll be ready to do that. We like I said, we have most of that ready now. As far as the Tier 5, we're gonna have that with some updated information. And Dr. McCoy asked for or alluded to what that may look like with some level of COLA or guaranteed COLA, which we'll prepare on how to provide that. Let me ask you this, since we are looking at Tier 5 again, just for preparation, in the context of preparation, does the board have any initial feedback on looking at some of those other things like I alluded to earlier? For example, do we want to look at having a minimum age requirement before retirement? Do we want to look at just having 2% multiplier for every year of service? Do we want to look at the highest 10 years of average compensation as opposed to the highest 4? Or if the vesting goes back to 8, would it be the highest 8? That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, that as many of you know, we have looked at it extensively the last several years. And I was asking, would it really yield much of a different result? So just for preparation's sake, do we want to look at some of those things and have a few scenarios with those? Just to remind you, one of the, I guess the next to last version was a choice between a reduced DB, similar to what I just described, or the hybrid. And I'm not necessarily pushing that or bringing that up. I'm just asking, since we are talking about a Tier 5, are we simply just looking at the last board-approved Tier 5 with a couple numbers on COLA, or do we look at some of the additional things that were talked about before? Any preferences or guidance or comments?
I can't answer that. Y'all have to speak to that.
What I'm interested in is this. Let's refresh all of the board members on why we said that it was not beneficial to the system to have a DC or a hybrid. We need to have that answer. I think that question is going to come. So we need to go back and look at the information that we had that influenced us to make that decision. Now,
That's just basically cost at that point.
yes, yes, that's what I remember. It was essentially cost that was involved. The other parts of the Tier 5, I am happy with the winnowing down of all of those little pieces that you mentioned, with the exception of the COLA. The COLA is my concern. The other parts, going from 8-year vesting to 4-year vesting, my question is, does that make 4-year vesting retroactive to everybody that, 8-year, if we go to 4, that sort of thing. But the COLA is primarily what I'm interested in, and the reasons why we didn't recommend the other Tier 5 components of hybrid and DC, because I think those are going to be questions, and legitimate questions. And does it, how much do our current numbers change, if any at all?
And the reason for just the COLA was that's the driver of the whole.
Yes.
Again, cost was the factor there. The others, if my memory is correct, did a very minimal impact on cost of the system, and the COLA is the driver.
Yeah, the COLA is the driver, the multiplier
Could,
because, you lower that 2% multiplier to 1.5%, you're cutting 25%.
or
of
you
the
do two
cost
for
of the- Yeah.
straight across.
Yeah.
I think you'd mentioned too, the minimum age requirement gets you some gains too.
Yeah, if you raise the age 60 or the 30 and out, to 65, which is what a lot of public sector plans have moved to, or a point system, a rule of 90, like have age in service equal to 90 to retire. That moves the needle a little bit on saving some.
But
some
impacts your law
cost.
enforcement and fire.
That's
when
the
you're in
big
same-
issue
when
with
you're in the same
PERS,
system.
is because you have different groups all in PERS.
It may not need to be working at 65.
Can you have one scenario where if there's a guaranteed 3%, what the scenario would be to adjust the rate, the service credit annual rate, to an amount that basically equals what it would be if you didn't guarantee the COLA?
If you kept the 3% COLA, reduce the multiplier, and what would be the same cost?
1.75 or whatever.
We can do that.
I think the downside of that would be, under what was proposed, there was still the potential for, with all the work that's going on, there was still the potential for those folks to get a COLA.
Yeah, the plan we had in place was, again, just a reminder, was to lower the employee contribution percentage to 7%, right? That was for new employees, they would only put in 7%. The cost, that's basically a little bit of savings, but that was the cost for the 3% COLA, was them not getting the COLA. They would be able to put in less money into the system, and then they wouldn't get a guaranteed COLA. Wasn't saying we weren't gonna give an ad hoc COLA to them when they retire, but it was to reduce that. So that was the thing. If you're bringing back a COLA of any sort, then you're then you're looking at potentially raising that 7% back up to 9% for new employees. So again, if we want to rehash that, but go through that again, process again, we'll be happy to do that with y'all.
Now that, I don't mind that. Everybody, all employees are accustomed to the 9% contribution. And with the tier 5, it would go down, as we have proposed, it would go down to 7. Well, if we left that at 9%, just as all the other employees, and we have the 3% COLA, I personally think that that is a good thing for our members. And I'd just like to see what that is, what that cost is.
How is it, sorry, Dr. McCoy, how does that look different, what Dr. McCoy just said, than tier 4?
I was about to say,
does-
that,
it
what
is
he just
tier- it
described
is
was
tier
little
4.
to no change, I think.
Yeah, it would be no change. But with your scenario, with reducing the multiplier, what could we do? Keeping the 9%, keeping the COLA, what could we do with the multiplier to reduce that, to get some savings for tier 5 into the plan? That would be the thing. Just to remind again, the board, I think why the board's consensus got to the not guaranteed COLA is, again, this is going to be years into the future, the next generation of actuaries and boards here and staff, but it's to control the cash flow. That was the big thing about controlling those benefit payments into the future was really beneficial. When we looked at the graphs 50, 70 years from now, how beneficial that was by being able to control what the COLAs are. And a lot of plans across the country have gone to this variable COLA approach. Many plans, I'm sure those who have been to NASRA, the NASRA committee conference, you've heard those directors talk about their variable COLAs. And sometimes they're in better funded positions, for those plans, or they've gotten in better funded positions by going to some variable COLA approaches. So that's just information. Again, we'll be here, we'll be able to go through that all with you again.
You mentioned the next generation of people in these positions. That's one thing I don't ever hear us talk about. The average age of this board, I won't guess what it is, but somebody younger than me needs to be commenting, or we need to ask employers, people that are hiring at the school, that are hiring elsewhere, what do 20-somethings want? I realize we live in a world where we worked somewhere for 30 years, and we took pride in that. But today, because of the way the skill sets are changing, and if we're going to try to educate to a skilled economy, that skill I learned today, I may have to be retrained within 8 years or 6 years, and then I'm moving to the next field or the next arena. I don't know if you all have data on that. It's hard to put that in an actuarial model, but we got to hire people in the state of Mississippi. And while Dr. McCoy may believe a 3% guaranteed COLA paying 9% is what everybody wants, I don't know what a 20-something-year-old wants that's going into education. We hope if somebody's going into education that they're going to stay, or going into healthcare, or going in, but we have to compete with the market for labor as a state, and we got to hire people, and we got to hire some of the best and brightest. So if our people here that hire people across the state of Mississippi, and the young people who we're hiring have an opinion, I sure would like for that to be factored into this board's recommendation, because I'm going to try to do that on any vote we might have at the legislature.
Trying to address that thing, let's use teachers, and Dr. Smith, you can help me here. If a person is going to make teaching a career, and if they're going to start at 22 years of age, say, generally by the 5th year, they're either with us or they're gone. Okay, well, so if that's the case, then it pops into my mind, what about people that leave the system, let's say before 10 years? They don't get a COLA. When they start drawing their money out, they don't get a COLA. But people that stay 30 years, they get a 3% COLA. Or, I mean, that's an idea that just popped into my mind. I mean, those that are moving on have decided they need another skill set, and they want to do something differently. So what would happen for, as a reward for those long-term employees, that they get a larger COLA? That's intriguing to me.
And that's the discussion, and that's kind of when we say hybrid, I think sometimes that's what we mean, is there's incentives within the system that may be harder to run actuarially, but it may be more functionally relevant to our employees, because if that's true in the education field, then I wouldn't want a 4-year vesting period. I would want an 8-year vesting period, because if somebody looks at it and says, I'm gonna stick it out, I gotta stick it out to vest, well, maybe by the time they get to 8, they've gotten over that 5-year hump, or they've got, so that's good. But on the flip side, if somebody's in the healthcare field, they may be more apt to move between entities, or they're an engineer, or, because, I mean, we talk about this all the time. It's hard to hire accountants at the state auditor's office. That's what I hear him say. It's hard to hire engineers at MDOT because the state doesn't pay what the market bears. But what we do as a state is we often train up accountants, engineers, professional degrees, and then they go into the private sector. So when we think about that, could we hire better people at a lower price for a longer period of time if they had an option? And then could we also retain our people who want to be long-term state employee retirement? So when we talk about earlier the relationship with how we give legislative recommendations, those are the discussions I hope we're having. I know y'all are having, but then I hope we have on the other side of the street. But I do think we do need to focus on people who are hiring today, what they believe is necessary to have quality state employees, as well as being strong members of our retirement system.
I don't have any more about this, but one other question that I might have, well, I do have, is I know that we're gonna have our current actuary, we're gonna have 2 other actuaries. I know that the lieutenant governor hired some attorney to look at the COLA, you know, the legality of changing the COLA. So are there any other, and maybe the legislators, is there any other expertise that the legislature may be hiring, like additional actuaries or anything like that might help us in some way, or some experts that you're looking to look at it from a perspective that we have not, of which we've not thought?
Not to my knowledge. I think the 2 actuaries, as part of the legislation, was to give that, say, second and third opinion, which if they use different assumptions, or like you were asking earlier, all of that can be factored in to say, well, you know, further questions for any of the 3 of them, I think, are relevant. And then the tweaks that each of us kind of are interested in.
If there was an expertise that somebody had out there and you discovered them, let us know. Okay?
I'll bring them.
Well, now this is a little different than what Senator Sparks is referring to, but I am aware that there's one additional actuarial firm that's working with legislative leadership on the Senate side. I understand in the consideration of a tier 5. That's different than I think what he's talking about on the other 2.
Actuary or?
To my knowledge, an actuary.
Okay.
An actuarial firm.
So, okay.
This is a 4th firm?
I would say it depends on how you want to characterize it, but yes, sir.
All right, I don't want to cut off this good discussion, but we're close to our time limit of an hour on the legislative committee. Are there other, Mr. Director, anything?
No, sir, nothing. I think it can all wait till October or in between. I appreciate that.
Keep in mind of my original remarks of getting whatever we want to them to consider as soon as we could. Now, I believe our next meeting is not until December.
October.
October.
Or is a regular meeting.
So, okay, well, that's better then, because we don't want to wait to the last minute to dump something over there to get them to properly look at it.
If, you know, and certainly if we need to have a work session in some manner to address any of these particular things or questions that you need to have addressed by a board, I think I'm personally willing for a work session to be scheduled and do whatever we need to do with that. Whether it's
With our legislative colleagues.
Do what now?
with our legislative colleagues, I think would
Oh,
be helpful.
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
we make some sausage over here sometimes too, and I think it's helpful for them to see kind of what we hear and what we
Yeah,
take into consideration.
absolutely, absolutely.
All right, anything else from the board? Mr. Director?
No, sir, thank
All right,
you.
this concludes the legislative meeting. Thank you for all of your input on the very interesting conversation, and from our legislator friends too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.